Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party, home to such great shows as Nerd Nuptial, Missing Frames, Aggressive Negotiations, and many others. On today's show, spoiler warning, we are going to be talking about all things spoilerific and looking at the current state of spoiler culture in the world of TV and film. I'm Dallas King, and with me as always is Lee Hutchison. How are you this week?
Yeah, really good. We're having a bit of a heat wave at the moment, so it seems like it's a good opportunity to talk about what films people should go see at the cinema, what TV programmes that they need to avoid spoilers for, that they need to be sitting in their homes at 2 a.m. watching. It seems like we're doing our duty to make sure that people stay pale and pasty in the UK.
Exactly. As you know, the Readagraph sometimes says outside of the Prince Charles in London, sod the sunshine, come sit in the dark and watch a film. So yeah, as we talked about a bit about it sort of last week, but Filibuster and the A24 project are eligible for the British Podcast Awards Listener's Choice Award at the moment, and so if you feel so inclined as to cast your vote towards one of those, if you want to go to www.britishpodcastawards.com/vote and select Filibuster or A24 project and cast your vote, it'd be very much appreciated, because you know it's always nice to hear nice things about the podcast and get feedback and stuff like that, but it'd be, you know, if we could get a nomination, it'd be quite nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, take that, Mark Kermode, we're coming for the film title.
Exactly, yeah, he doesn't need any more awards. Give it to a new show, you know, that's what you need to do. So, Lee, what have you been up to? You mean this week? Have you been, so, you know, you've hinted that you were staying out of the sunshine and sitting in the dark watching movies. What have you been catching this week?
Well, I did plan to, on Friday, see a double bill of Shazam and Red Joan, but it really was too nice, so I decided to kind of stay out and eat ice cream instead. But kind of a few days into the bank holiday, I was sort of like, no, I need to kind of get going. There's stuff I need to see. I don't cope too well in the sun, so I went and had a double bill just this afternoon of Shazam and Greta. So kind of Shazam, I think this has almost been out for about a month at this point, and I've kind of been thwarted in my attempts to kind of see it so far, and kind of saw it today, and while I did enjoy it, I had the feeling that if I was like a 13-year-old boy watching this, it would be like my favourite comic book kind of movie ever. I just felt it was, you know, while it was enjoyable, it was kind of a bit throwaway. My feeling was like, does a movie like this need to be 130 minutes? It felt like it was one of these ones that you've got a good story. Like, I can imagine a 99-minute version of something like Shazam being like, you know, one of the better kind of movies, comic book movies of sort of the past years. You know, I'd certainly say it's the best DCEU movies kind of to date, but I just felt like it was like, it kind of slogged on a little bit, and the gimmick kind of wore off a bit towards the end. The last act punch up kind of dragged on a bit, but perhaps I am sort of the audience for these movies, but I feel that the audience that truly would love and appreciate this movie is sort of that younger male teenage audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I saw this a couple of weeks ago when I got back from a holiday, and yeah, I mean, I was sold on the trailers. It made it look sort of very different to what the DCEU had been going for so far, and yeah, I mean, the comparisons with Big are obvious, and they even put in a joke about the piano in the toy shop during one of the fight scenes, and you know, I thought Zachary Levi was great. I thought he was great in the role. He just captured it. He just nailed that performance of a 13-year-old boy in, you know, the body of a superhero. And I almost would have liked to have seen more in the first half of the movie of him sort of getting to grips with his powers and actually just getting to grips with being in the body of an adult. I thought there was much more opportunity for humour and sort of to be mined in there, and I think they kind of almost straight away went into the, okay, here's the supervillain, and they're going to have punch up after punch up after punch up, which then leads to a mass punch up at the end, which apparently to some people was quite a surprise. However, if you'd happened to have seen the toys that were available for Shazam, it did kind of, I guess, spoil the ending, and because, you know, it wasn't hinted at in the trailers, but the toys kind of give away one of the twists, so I guess, you know, it leads on to what we're going to be talking about later. But, you know, yeah, I thought it was good, but it wasn't great. I think for me, still, I think Wonder Woman is still my favourite DCEU film. I think it's the one that's tonally managed to nail it perfectly of what it was trying to do, because this is a kids film. It's aimed at a younger audience, but I mean, there was some rather dodgy and quite scary moments, I thought, in there. There were the villainous monsters and stuff. It was quite intense, and I thought taking a younger crowd to that, it could give them nightmares. I thought. What did you think of the creatures and stuff, and especially the boardroom scene where there was a guy got his head bitten off, essentially?
Yeah, I thought the boardroom scene was a bit quite kind of dark. It sort of, that was the one more I thought, yeah, I can imagine that being sort of a 12A, though. I don't think I've seen this before in sort of, at the beginning where you get the British Board of Film Classification little logo and, hey, it's going to have some swearing, violence. It had unbleeped swear language, and I was like, what? How is that a thing? I didn't even realise sort of the BBFC kind of would flank that as potential issues. But I kind of felt that was the boardroom scene was what kind of pushed it probably over into a 12, maybe some too much punching perhaps, but I thought that sequence was a bit kind of gory if it was for sort of a younger audience. But the kind of the 7 deadly sins in terms of these ogres weren't that kind of great. Like, it was kind of a bit boring, and there would be some you would kind of look at and go, oh yeah, that one must be greed because it's kind of fat and stuff, but they didn't really have much in the way of any sort of personality or anything. And I was wondering maybe sort of if these creatures had maybe been sort of in not human form as such, but kind of actors portraying these kind of sins. I think that could have been a little bit more interesting, but it certainly does make for an interesting double bill where you could watch Shazam and Seven. That could maybe be something for some sort of podcast in the future.
Perhaps, and yeah, no, I know what you mean, because yeah, if they'd been more humanoid, it might have been a bit better, because they started off as sort of statues and then became creatures. It kind of reminded me of like Ghostbusters and the sort of ghoulish dogs that sort of came out of the top of the building in Ghostbusters. But I mean, are you excited for the future? Do you think you'd like to see a Shazam 2? Because they talk about the original Shazam sort of talks about how he'd tried to find a champion in the past, but he'd basically turned his back on all that was good and become quite villainous. Now that's a direct hint at Black Adam, I think. And Black Adam is going to be played in the DCEU by the busiest man in show business, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Are you looking forward to seeing Zachary Levi go up against Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in a SmackDown?
See, I was thinking that I've kind of been out of the loop really with Shazam apart from the trailers, so even sort of the spoilers that in the toys, I didn't know or didn't expect that to actually happen, so I was a bit surprised there. But I'd kind of remembered years ago sort of hearing something about The Rock and Shazam, and I was like, oh yeah. I was kind of thinking at one point during the film, I was like, yeah, I wonder if Shazam could have been The Rock. I wonder if that was sort of the role he was going for. And because I remember there was some kind of thing. And then when I noticed he was the producer name at the end, I was like, oh, that must have been his involvement. So here you are, you're going kind of blowing my mind again with this revelation.
Yeah, no, because I think when he first, I mean, he's been sort of circling the project for years, and I think they decided that to introduce Black Adam in the first Shazam movie was going to be too much, so they purposely have held off. Although, just to continue back to the world of wrestling, I think John Cena was sort of muted at one point for the role of Shazam. So there could have been a rematch of WrestleManias. I think it was 32 and 33. Just showing my geeky knowledge of wrestling there. But I thought Zachary Levi was great in the role, and he sort of captured that sort of thing. But I'm excited to see, especially how he interacts going forward into the DCEU, because with Zack Snyder starting it all off, there was a definite sort of dark, dreary tone, and Wonder Woman had its own thing. Aquaman was a different beast entirely. So even Justice League was similarly sort of Zack Snyder, because Joss Whedon took over it. So it's going to be interesting to see how they fit Shazam in compared to the other ones. I mean, there was you could call it a cameo, but is it really a cameo at the end when it's clearly they haven't been able to get Henry Cavill along for the day's shooting, so it's just like Superman from the chest down. It's like, oh, that could have been something really cool, but it was just kind of like, oh, it's like, yeah, Marvel are still the kings of the post-credit scene there.
That thing, what I find it odd, sort of, is sort of that change that's kind of happened with Marvel and DC, and other people have pointed this out before, so it's nothing kind of and there's no revelation here, but it's the idea that, at the beginning, when DCEU had its tone and it was much darker. Oh, we don't want to be like Marvel where it's always cracking jokes and everything's a big, ha ha ha. Whereas it's more sort of shifted towards that sort of in kind of recent years, and it's been highlighted, especially in this kind of movie as well. Like, this could easily be sort of a Marvel kind of movie in terms of tone, etc. I mean, they've even gone as far to start doing all these post-credit sequences, which, oh no, we don't do that. These movies are all self-contained, and it has been so obvious that they've kind of gone from sort of, hey, we're going to do our own thing, to really sort of kind of going along with that kind of Marvel model, and I think this film has really highlighted that.
Exactly. It's even down to the post-credit stings, where the first post-credit sting, a la Marvel, sets up the plot of the next film, whereas the tag right at the very end is kind of a throwaway joke. And so, yeah, there's that. And, I mean, technically Shazam's name in the comic books was Captain Marvel, but for obvious reasons now he's not been referred to that in the film. Although, Shazam is an odd name. You can't really call yourself Shazam as the hero, because every time he says Shazam, he's going to change back between the kid and the superhero. So he's going to have to come up with an alternative name. I don't know if he's going to continue with Captain Sparklefingers, but I guess it'd be interesting to see what they call him in the end.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those things I kind of clicked with that, because obviously I've never read the comic books, and I was thinking, like, yeah, I wonder what his name actually is, because also they can't say Shazam. Everyone else around him can say it, but he can't. So, and I assume it's the same with the other characters now. If they say Shazam, interesting.
Yeah, so I guess we'll see. But from one scale of blockbuster down to something else, featuring a former superhero actress herself. It's fair to say, with Chloe Grace Moretz, who first burst onto the scene, oh god, how long ago was it? Probably 2010, so about 9 years ago, in Kick-Ass, and that's Greta, which we've both seen this weekend. So you've just basically come out of a screening of this. I'm interested to hear your take on Neil Jordan's sort of 80s throwback, sort of erotic, sort of thriller, sort of Fatal Attraction sort of thing. What did you make of this?
Yeah, I really liked it. I've been looking forward to this movie, so I really like Isabella Huppert. And Elle, one of her sort of last movies, was my second favourite film of sort of 2 years ago, so 2017. I absolutely loved it, her performance in that. And I love Chloe Grace Moretz. I think she's been picking some really exciting kind of properties in the past few years. Maika Monroe, I thought she was excellent in The Guest. Hasn't perhaps picked the best films since. So this kind of cast and story, when I saw the trailer, I was like, yeah, it's great to see this kind of cast in it. But I thought, oh my god, the trailer's totally ruined it. That there's going to be this twist halfway through the movie, or towards the end, that this character Greta goes out handing out these dropping off these bags, and kind of lures in young women or what have you to kind of their doom. So I was really happy when I watched this film today that is within sort of the first 15 minutes that this bag thing happens. Yeah, they're starting a bit of a relationship, Francis and Greta, sort of this mother-daughter kind of hybrid. And then, she finds the bags and immediately goes into the rest of the film. So what you kind of see in the trailer just plays that first kind of 10-15 minutes, apart from the odd shot. And I really liked that. It meant I could sort of settle into the film and go, I'm going to be surprised by the way this goes. Where's it going to go? What kind of shape it's going to take? And I really enjoyed it. It was a really nice, as you see, kind of throwback to that 80s, early 90s, that it was nice to have a film like this for adults, as it were, where it's an original property. It's something original. It's got a great cast. It has very little kind of male actors in it. They're in such small roles it barely registers. And I just thought this was a kind of real treat. It kind of, you get into it, and I really liked that. It felt like Chloe Grace Moretz is playing this as like a horror, and Isabella Huppert is playing it like that sort of 80s, 90s thriller with sort of a wink to the sort of the audience, and sort of becomes a little bit campy. And I really like that they're both in different places with how they treat this film. I just thought it was a real treat, and I really liked it. Those parts I felt my heart beating, a bit of tension, and I just thought it was a really, I think I kind of described it to someone as, it's such a good film to watch on a Sunday afternoon. I really enjoyed it. How did you kind of fare with it?
Oh, I enjoyed every single minute of this. I remember like sort of hearing about it at the sort of tail end of last year, and then was thinking, oh, whatever happened to that film? Is it coming out? I thought it was coming out sort of summer, and then I'd caught the trailer sort of last week and realised it was out this week, and I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to go and see that. And I'd seen, the trailer, like you say, it looks like it tips its hand too early, but really the sort of discovery that she's been placing bags into the New York subway in order to, meet young girls to basically sort of take on the sort of surrogate role of her daughter, she's sort of lives off in Paris and is estranged from, and so you think that that's just it, and she seems a little bit sort of needy and possessive, and that's when sort of Chloe Grace Moretz says, okay, it's probably best if I don't hang out with this woman anymore. But it's safe to say that Isabelle Huppert decides that it's not going to be that easy to get rid of her. One of the repeated lines in the film is, I'm like chewing gum, I tend to stick around, and it's safe to say that, Chloe Grace Moretz can't shift her that easily. And it just sort of, I just love the way it sort of goes from there all the way up to 11 in terms of her performance of sort of pure bunny boiler sort of madness, and it was just a joy to behold that sort of, she goes like, swinging for the fences, and what makes it work is, like you say, Chloe Grace Moretz plays it very sort of grounded and real in how you would assume someone would respond to this, but Isabelle Huppert is going for it, but it's always anchored with the Chloe Grace Moretz, who, once again, she is on a roll at the moment, I think, for films that she's picking. She's had Suspiria, Miseducation of the Cameron Post, and, she did, I think, have a wobble sort of with likes of Carrie and stuff like that, and sort of was going down the route of, she's always remaking everyone's favourite horror films and stuff like this, but I think she's really sort of got her head screwed on at the moment. She's picking the sort of right projects for her and stuff like that. And Micah Monroe, I thought, was great in the supporting role of the best friend who, just happened to have a very rich dad who's bought them a Tribeca loft, of course, because, these kids, always have massive apartments, so at least it was addressed that, the dad was rich enough to buy it for them, because you're like, I mean, come on, really? Waitressing and a girl who just sits around doing yoga, how could they afford this? It's like, it's one of those standard New York sort of staple things. But I really like that. And, she's been great for doing sort of 80s throwbacks. I mean, like The Guest, we both huge fans of The Guest. And, for me, It Follows is one of the best horror films of the last 5 years. And she's on a roll at the moment for picking 80s throwback films, and long may it continue. I mean, obviously, I know I don't want to go into anything that basically happens after, the fact that, she finds the bags and decides that she doesn't want to see it anymore, because, that gets into spoiler territory, and I think it's more fun if you go in not knowing exactly what's going to happen, but it's probably not going to end well, I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think it's films like this, we always talk about some of the independent movies that people need to support, and I think this one kind of falls under it as well, that there's been a real sort of kind of dry spell of films like this for audiences, and I think something like this is something to be kind of championed. Chloe Grace Moretz is the big name in this, but in terms of sort of for Hollywood audiences, it's it's a not a cast that people would perhaps pick the names out of the hat for, and I think something like this is just, it's a bit different. It's something that is a throwback to, as I say, the 80s and 90s, but that's sometimes a good thing as well. We talk about sort of, it's kind of nostalgia, but this isn't a film where you feel kind of nostalgic watching. It's a kind of tribute to sort of a genre of film that has sort of kind of not really been well represented, and I think something like this could easily be quite, maybe a bit tacky, a bit kind of generic, but I think under sort of Neil Jordan's direction, he sort of elevates it. I think the score is really good. I think some of the direction choices, how the actors kind of approach it, I think they've really set this apart from what kind of film this could be. I think in the hands of any other director, could be something different, and I think it would be probably less significant too.
Yeah, no, and it's what I liked about it as well was the fact that it was a relationship between, well, not an actual mother and daughter, but it was exploring that sort of relationship, and also, given the sort of the Me Too movement as well, it's it was interesting to see, how you go about the process of trying to, talk to the police about this person is, interfering in my life, stalking me and whatever, and how little they can do, without, if it's just sort of psychological stuff. It's really quite interesting to see that, and also the fact that, we've seen plenty of movies where, like, a guy is stalking a girl and stuff like that, but to see a woman doing it as well was quite a novel approach, and I thought it really worked as well.
Yeah, definitely. I hope people kind of check this out. I think the time is going to be limited before the Avengers kind of rolls into the box office. So this episode will drop on Wednesday, so you can probably squeeze in this before your Avengers double bills or something at 5 o'clock or something like that. That's probably going to be your one and only opportunity if you're listening to this episode just now.
I know. Well, when I went to see it, I went to see it on opening night, and it was actually in the biggest screen at my local Cineworld. I was like, wow, what's going on here? It's probably moved down over the weekend, but I thought it was great. And it was actually really pretty well attended because, like you say, for a multiplex crowd, the names are not probably immediate draws, but I think clearly the distributor's doing a great job with the marketing and the trailer and stuff like that. And like you say, it is an alternative to Avengers Endgame, and there's not going to be much. I mean, I've already looked, and it's looking around about 8 screens out of my 10 will be showing Avengers, so there's going to be very little in the way of other choice. But if you are able to see Greta this week or next week, please do also check out 8th Grade, which we are big fans of as well. That comes out on Friday the 26th, so the same weekend as Avengers Endgame. So if it is, if you can squeeze in a screening of 8th Grade or Greta, in between multiple screenings of Avengers Endgame, please do so, because, Avengers Endgame doesn't need, it's going to make billions anyway, but, it's the smaller films that do need champions, so don't wait around for them to get onto DVD and stuff like that. Please, go and check them out at the cinemas. But obviously, Avengers Endgame is a film which you're going to need to see at the cinema. And if you're a fan of the MCU, it's a film which you're probably going to have to see as close to the opening date as possible for fear of spoilers. And, we touched upon it sort of last week when we were talking about interviewing and sort of the press junket sort of side of things, where it makes it very difficult for the actors to talk about because they can't talk about it because they might not have even seen the finished film, and then obviously the people who are interviewing them have not seen the film either, so it does make it difficult. And like you say, with this trailer, this podcast is dropping on Wednesday, which means while you're listening to it, Lee and I are probably both going to our midnight screenings because we want to see it first, because we don't want to have Endgame spoiled. # don't spoil the Endgame. And so we just want to have a bit of a general discussion about spoiler culture and, using Avengers Endgame as a sort of jumping off point. So, Lee, I guess what I want to ask is, what are your thoughts on spoiler culture at the moment? Is it something which vastly affects your movie-going and TV-going experience? Do you have to try to see things as close to on date as possible to avoid spoilers, or are you pretty good at managing to avoid this sort of thing? What are your general thoughts on it just now?
Both, to be honest. I try and see things as close to release as possible. And I think that's kind of largely because when I go into films, whether it's Avengers Endgame or something like Greta, for example, I've seen the trailers. I'm not interested. There's great writers out there and people that I know that are writing really great pieces about these sorts of things. I'm not interested in reading them until I've seen the film. I don't want, anything to be kind of tainting my kind of first experience. I don't want to be thinking, in recent years, I think things like Variety have earned a horrible reputation of spoiling films and, kind of going all out in terms of saying, hey, if you watch this film, this bit's going to happen. And that's the stuff I just can't be bothered risking. So once I watch a film, something like whether it's Avengers or Greta or whatever, then I'll start to dive into, I often like to look at the IMDb trivia afterwards, and I always consider that somewhat spoily in terms of some of the creative decisions and choices that were made there. But I just want to sort of have the conversation after the film. And it'd be the same, like me and you will not produce a podcast talking about Avengers Endgame. in any sort of meaningful way until we have seen the film, and then we can kind of spill the beans on it. If we did something on it now, it would just be sort of theories on this, theories on that, and sometimes that kind of taints it because you go in thinking, right, this isn't what I expected, I thought this was going to happen, etc., etc. So I kind of think if I go in not having read anything, maybe just seen the trailers, and then it's going to be the purest version of the way possible. I'll avoid spoilers, I'll avoid having my feelings or expectations kind of tainted. I think that's sometimes the best way to go. I'm lucky in that respect that I kind of have a flexible job in some respect. I can, have access to cinemas quite easily. I can go to a midnight release and not have anything spoiled, and I think that's sometimes the best way to go. What about for yourself?
I think I'm the same. I'll tend to wait and hold off and read reviews until after the film. I'll probably see maybe sort of like star ratings and stuff like that, but I'll tend to avoid any sort of reading any in-depth articles, even sort of interviews and stuff sometimes. It's just the way of the world. In terms of trailers, I'll watch the trailers, I'll watch the sort of teaser and the main one. What I'm trying to do at the moment is avoid any of the multiple and many TV spots, which I think are now dropping. They did it for Star Wars, they do it for Avengers Endgame. It's certainly at the moment, every time there's a sort of ticketing announcement or 1 week to go and whatever, they seem to be releasing brand new sort of 30-second clips, and I'm like, at this point I'm just like, nope, don't care, don't want to know. And I think what you said earlier was quite interesting about the having your expectations let down and whatever, and sort of theorizing and stuff like that. And I think this is one of the reasons why there was such a divide on The Last Jedi, is because people spent ages and ages sort of going, all right, well, from the trailer, what does this mean? What does that mean? Let's speculate. Let's get a theory about Kylo Ren's going to be doing this, or Rey's parents are going to be doing this. And so you build up a movie in your head basically before you go in, and then when Rian Johnson delivers his movie and it doesn't exactly match up with your theory, that's what seemed to upset quite a lot of people, that he didn't go the way that they wanted their Star Wars to go, because I think they basically said #not my Star Wars. But it's like, well, as I said, I'm a big fan of what Rian Johnson did, so I'm quite happy. It's let the filmmaker tell the story. Yeah, you're never going to agree with every single choice. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be things happen in Avengers Endgame that people will not want to happen, but they probably will. But I trust the Russos and what they're doing. So yeah, if they feel that it's necessary for the story, then absolutely they can go away and do that. So, but there's a lot of Avengers Endgame stuff happening. They've been doing the press junket tour, they've been going to China, South Korea and stuff like that, and apparently there was even a leak of some footage that might have been from like a rating screening from the Middle East. But I think the premiere of the film is on a Monday night in LA, and basically that's, for a lot of people, is going to be the cut-off date of basically, I'm coming off social media because I don't want to hear or see anything about it. Are you planning a social media blackout, Lee, or are you going to stick to muting hashtags and stuff like that and seeing if you can make it to Wednesday night without being spoiled?
I think I'll be okay. Like, I have no interest in reading the reviews or the Rotten Tomatoes stuff when it drops. That I suppose I was kind of lucky that I'd managed to sort of get offered a chance to go to sort of the media screening on Tuesday. And it did cross my mind of like, should I go to London? I'll be one of the first in the world to see the film, so there's no chance of me spoiled. But then I thought, that's just a bit excessive. I'm not spending all that money to piss off down to London to watch a film. So I was like, no, I'll pass on my opportunity. But as soon as that sort of news broke that there was some footage or something had been leaked, from the tail end of the film, I muted it. I muted the hashtags and stuff, which I hadn't done, and I muted some of the names, etc. I was just like, hey, consider it blocked until afterwards. And I'd mentioned in sort of one of my kind of group chats, I was like, oh my god, this stuff's broken. And this sums up sort of the complete mentality. If I'd mentioned that in sort of like the nerd party group chat that we have, people would be like, hey, get this muted, I don't want to know. And then in one of my other group chats, a guy went, I'm going to go see if I can find what actually the footage is about. And I was like, why the hell would you do that? I was like, you better not come back into this group chat and spoil it. And then he came back a few minutes ago, I can't find it. And we were like, it'll be on like 4chan or something like that. And then he went off and read it, went, I have now got the information on board. I now know what will happen. okay. And it was just like, I can't imagine what kind of world where you'd want to do that or kind of even kind of spoil anything like that. And I think, you know, the joy is the UK will get it before America. We'll be there. I'm seeing the sort of the Infinity War Endgame double bill in IMAX, so I'll be one of the first in the world to see it. There's no chance of loudmouth Americans spoiling the film for me or filtering their thoughts onto my Twitter feed, so I'm going to be okay for seeing the film, and that's more than enough for me. I would have been a bit more nervous if sort of America had got it sort of any length of time before the UK, so I think my kind of current state of mind will be okay.
Yeah, no, I think we'll be fine. I have muted several hashtags and whatever. Actually, just gets me thinking that, you know, this was before Twitter and social media was a thing. But, you know, The Phantom Menace premiered in America, I think it was about 3 or 4 months before it actually came to the UK. Could you imagine a situation like that these days where there was such a long gap with social media? People would lose their minds. You know, there's no way you'd be able to avoid spoilers and stuff like that in this day and age.
Remember the biggest spoiler of The Phantom Menace was the soundtrack.
Yes,
I think it was released
even
before
sort of
UK. Was it Qui-Gon's Noble End?
And Qui-Gon's funeral, and it was like, oh my god, I can't believe they've allowed that to happen. I can't believe it. I remember that. I was like, yeah, so yeah, no, technically, yeah, no, The Phantom Menace was spoiled before people had actually even seen the film, so yeah. So yeah, don't read soundtrack listings.
I think my attitude's also changed. That I was thinking like the other day when I was thinking about spoilers. Like I don't watch Game of Thrones. I will eventually watch it. I did intend to watch it in this 2-year gap between the show, but it failed to happen. But it's kind of one of those ones that, you know, people have been posting for years about Game of Thrones. Like, it's past the point now where people even need to be discreet about some of the things that happen and people that die and come back, etc. But I think it's one of these things, like, I think if you don't have the context of some of the plot points or whatever, then the things just kind of wash over you and you don't sort of assimilate it in. They're not names that you kind of recognize, etc. And I always kind of come back to sort of my girlfriend. She's not in the nerd bubble that me, you, and people that probably listen to podcasts and pre-book their tickets months ahead of time for something like Endgame. You know, we're complaining, hey, oh my god, like they've announced that there's a Spider-Man movie coming a few months later. That kind of taints the end of this film or what could come in the next one, etc. Even though we know people are going to come back. And then, like, you know, my girlfriend is a complete normie in that respect. She gets her news and comments from me, and it's like, oh, there's a new Spider-Man movie. I didn't realise that. You know, she saw something like Infinity War, like a couple weeks after the film had come out, that everyone on the internet is making memes about. I don't feel so good. And she gets shocked when, like, Spider-Man poofs away. And I think sometimes that people like that are completely lucky to be in sort of that bubble. And that's going to be the majority of the people that are putting the billions into the box office, are those kind of people that are going along and seeing the film because it's something that they do, as opposed to following the entire film, going out and watching the trailers, debating it, etc. Those are just the normal people, and I think they come out of it without the anxiety about spoilers. They're not muting their social media, they're not having to do anything differently at all.
Yeah, no, they're not having to get up at 2 a.m. in the UK to watch Game of Thrones live, a live cast of it at the same time as the US, so they're not spoiled. They can't even wait until, I think it's 6 a.m. Some people get up and watch it now, and it's just like, that is extreme. And, you know, I can understand, because, you know, Game of Thrones is a big thing. You know, I was always, because I didn't have Sky, I was always like a season behind, and I would wait until the box set came out and then sort of watch the box set. It's something that my wife was never interested in watching, so it's something I'd have to watch on my own and stuff like that, so I'd catch up. It's very slowly, but, you know, you'd see things on social media, but by that point, you know, it was like I wasn't too familiar with the names, so it was like, you know, those such and such Targaryen, or, you know, such, and it was like, okay, right, so someone's dead, and I was like, well, I can't even remember really who they were talking about at that time, so, you know, I'll be fine watching it. You know, I mean, I fully expect that I'll know who finally sits on the Iron Throne before the end of the series, but because it's not something I'm, you know, that invested in, it's not really going to matter. You know, Breaking Bad is a show that I got the entire box set of and then binged the whole thing, but, you know, it didn't, you know, my enjoyment of it was not spoilt by anything that I may have seen or anything, you know, at the time. And I think it's, yeah, maybe it's about that. I mean, do you think that the way that media is now consumed affects spoiler culture as well, in the fact that people talk about water cooler moments, EastEnders, the ending of EastEnders. Oh, did you see? Or at this TV program that, EastEnders always ends on a cliffhanger with a doof, 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 doof. And, people would be talking about it at work the next day, these water coolers. Every work has a water cooler, but it became known as the water cooler moment that you go and talk to these people about. But do you think that's changed now with shows that you're basically able to watch an entire series almost like before you go to work on a Friday? I know people who will do that. If a new series drops, they will try and watch every single episode on the day it drops, so they can then start talking about it with people. But are you able to talk about it with people because you're always constantly worrying about the fact that, oh, this person may have not seen it yet? Are we able to talk about it? So
yeah, and I think it's one of those ones. I think, I think of our office on Monday just past, like a couple of people had watched Game of Thrones and had a quick conversation about it. But I think sort of that water cooler has become sort of the online thing where, you watch something like Star Trek Discovery or Game of Thrones, and people are like, instead of sort of, hey, guy in the office, it's like, here's my thought, I'm going to throw it out to my followers and the world, and they can we'll have those conversations. There'll be threads about it, or it'll be a Facebook post on some group people are part of. I think that's kind of replaced part of it. And I think one thing that's kind of changed for me is, like, I think it's the fact that it's, people can access these things quite quickly. Gone are the days where you maybe have to wait months or something like that for some of these shows to come out. I'm thinking of something like Killing Eve at the moment. It's just 3 episodes in as of kind of already into the second season, and there's not even a UK release date, despite the fact it's being made by the BBC. So it's all very odd. And I think, kind of when all sort of Netflix became streaming, etc., it made it easier to sort of get this stuff, and people would be able to pretty much see it all simultaneously or within the first few hours. You get some shows that would air in the US on a Sunday and it would be on Netflix on the Monday, for example. And I always think of 24. That was a show I was just torrenting every week because the UK was so far behind, and it would just be spoiled for me. And I was actually actively seeking it being spoiled in sort of when I was at kind of first year uni, that the internet connection in the halls was crap, so there's no way I could sort of download or stream or torrent these things at all. So I was kind of having to go online and read like the spoiler website to find out what was happening in the episode, because that was the only way I could get the information. And I just think sort of the internet has just made it so accessible to sort of, you shouldn't have to be spoiled. You can, it's easier to kind of get by it, I think, now, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's kind of social media's leveled the playing field. It's given people a lot more access to, media, and also to talk about media. But then there's always people who feel that there's people who are abusing that. And, we haven't actually, I just want to say, the Wikipedia is basically saying that a spoiler is an element of a disseminated summary or description of any piece of fiction that reveals any plot elements which threaten to give away important details. Typically, the details of the conclusion of the plot, including climax and ending, are especially regarded as spoiler material. And there's almost this sort of way that spoiler has almost come to use another word for twist. Oh, there's a twist in the film, whatever. But a twist is just a thing that happens in the plot. Spoiler is basically somebody actively, if they're talking about it, it's a way of talking about a thing which is potentially going to spoil someone's enjoyment or viewing of the film. Some reviewers, I think, sort of say that anything in the first act is fair game when it comes to writing a review, whatever. But some people are like, oh no, you can't even, you shouldn't even be doing that now. And it's like, well, what are you meant to do? It's like, same as trailers. People say trailers spoil the plot of the film, but you've got to market the film somehow. Obviously with Avengers Endgame, there's some people who don't need any marketing. You could just say Avengers Endgame, April 24th, and people would be like, fine, yes, I always show up. I don't need to know anything else. That's fine. But there's always this wider audience that need to know something before they go along. And I guess, going back now into the annals of time, when do you think you were sort of first aware of people talking about spoilers, or a film that had a twist or whatever that people were talking about that you maybe had spoiled for you or were aware of and sort of talking about it?
Well, I think kind of two almost examples of this, of sort of kind of the olden days of being spoiled, and sort of one that kind of went the other way with it, which I think was quite impressive, was, sort of 1999 Star Trek Insurrection was coming out a good few weeks after sort of the American audiences were getting it, and I had read the book, sort of the film adaptation was released like a good few months earlier, and I actually bought it for a friend's Christmas present, and I read the book, and one of the twists in it was kind of exposed, and I was like, hey, that's all kind of fine and good, I read the book, and okay, that's fine. But one that was always stuck in my head was the X-Men 2 adaptation. I don't know why I picked up, but I picked up from Forbidden Planet in Aberdeen. I was like, I'm going to read the book, the film's not out for a good few weeks yet, I want to know what's going to happen. And I remembered reading it, and the big twist at the end, that the Phoenix, you see it kind of rising up in the river. And I was watching the film, and I was like, what's going on here? This wasn't in the book. And like, the book had actually removed the big twist from the film. Like, they had made a conscious decision not to spoil something. And I know they wouldn't do this nowadays, but remember back in the teletext days, there used to be a spoiler page for Star Trek where you could tune in to, like, on a Monday, and it would update with new spoilers, like, this is going to happen, here's some gossip, this film's going to be called that. And I remembered them saying Jadzia Dax will die at the end of season 6, and I was like, oh my god, like, I didn't expect that. And can you imagine that, like, teletext having a spoiler feed and stuff like that? And that was probably the first time I was kind of aware of it, was that kind of late 90s period. What about for you?
I think it probably would have been around the same sort of time. There was, twists and sort of surprise endings before then, and I'll talk about a few of those, but 1999 was probably the big year, because obviously you had The Phantom Menace, but then you had two films in quick succession at the end of 99, and, a man whose career has essentially been defined by twist endings and spoilers, M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense. And this was a film that the twist ending had not been spoilt for me. So I didn't know, what the twist was. However, because there was so much of press talking about this film, and there's this twist ending, you're not going to be able to guess what happens. And so, knowing there was a twist ending, and unfortunately for people who have not seen The Sixth Sense, but I'm going to spoil the ending. So you go in, and then in the first 5 minutes, Bruce Willis's character is shot in the stomach. And I'm like, all right, he's dead then, isn't he? He's a ghost. And then, of course, it turns out at the end that he is a ghost, The film works beautifully on two levels. It works perfectly as the story. And then when you look back on the film, knowing that he is a ghost, you see, it makes total sense. It actually works perfectly as a film. It's not a trick or whatever. The way it's shot and everything, and the fact that you never actually see him directly interact with anyone apart from Haley Joel Osment's character, it totally works. So that's great. But it was the fact that I was been aware of the twist made my brain actively start looking for a twist, and there was that. Whereas there was another film that came out that year that I wasn't aware of a twist, and when the twist happened in Fight Club, I literally shouted in the screen at the top of my voice, no fucking way. And I basically left the film and went straight into the next screening to watch it again, because I was like, there's no way. And then when you watch it again, you go, oh my god, Fincher's a genius. It makes total sense. It's absolutely true. Everything about it is absolutely true. And I'm like, oh my god. And I couldn't believe it. And it blew my mind, that one. And
I thankfully was too young to get any of the spoilers for that. Like, I remembered watching it, and I think it was when it came on to sort of Sky Movies, like maybe a year or so later on. I was too young to get the opportunity to see it at the cinema. It wasn't a film I was even aware of, and I remember just watching and thinking, like, oh wow, that's a really good twist. Yeah, I can get that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like Saw, the original Saw, back when they were good and actually, making an effort. It wasn't all just what's the most sickest torture device we can think of, but the ending of Saw when Redacted happens, and I was just like, oh my god, I didn't see that coming. That is brilliant. I love it when you see a film and it manages to hoodwink and blindside you with a twist that you didn't see coming. It's such a great feeling. It's such a joy when that happens. It's always good. But I mean, there has been twist endings since almost the beginning of cinema. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari of 1920 is a film which, has a twist. I mean, I'm not going to go into them. Citizen Kane, Rosebud, he starts off talking about Rosebud. What is Rosebud? What is Rosebud? And then you get the answer at the end, and, it's one that's maybe not entirely satisfactory for all people, but, there's that, Planet of the Apes. Huge twist in Planet of the Apes. Obviously, it was kept a secret up until now, but now, if you go and buy a copy of Planet of the Apes, the DVD cover has the twist on the cover of the DVD. So, what's up with that? Empire Strikes Back, huge twist at the time. A twist that you had to wait 3 years to find out what happened next. It's just, again, you probably wouldn't get that these days. And, of course, obviously, famously done in The Simpsons, when Homer Simpson comes out of Empire Strikes Back and basically talks very loudly to Marge about how he couldn't believe the fact that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father, to the queue of people waiting to go into Empire Strikes Back, which was great. And then, another great one, Psycho, which, has 2 twists, really. I mean, most people have seen Psycho, right? We could talk about that one, can't we?
I think we can.
I think it's probably fine. Because, what is the statute of limitation on spoilers? How long do you wait before you start openly talking about it? That's a question to be asked, especially in the age of social media. Some people think a week. Some people think after the opening weekend. Who knows? But Psycho, you had the twist that the main character, the name actress in that film, is killed off sort of around about half an hour in. And then it becomes Norman Bates' story, and then you've got the twist at the end that the killer, Mrs. Bates, is actually Norman Bates, dressed up as his mother. So you got 2 twists for the price of one in there. But this was, before Psycho, if you wanted to go see a film, you could apparently go and see a film. You'd buy a ticket, you could go in and just, sit in all day and watch the same film over and over. You wouldn't have to be in at the beginning. You could just buy your ticket, go in, start watching the film halfway through, and then sit in for the next one if you wanted. What Alfred Hitchcock did was demand that there was actual showtimes for Psycho, so people would have to book and go and see a film at a certain time, and there'd be billboards of Hitchcock pointing his watch outside saying, you absolutely must see Psycho from the very start. Anyone who is late will not be admitted to the screening. And then asks people, obviously, to then keep the secrets afterwards. He went as far as to basically buy as many paperback copies of Norman Bloch's book Psycho, so there were hardly any copies out in public circulation because he didn't want people to know the ending. So that was an extreme reaction, but it's given us cinema as what we have today in terms of showtimes and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think he did a good job because the marketing around that film was immense, and it was a sensation. He had lines around the block and people wanting to go and see this film, and it was just a fantastic idea. And I wonder what people can do these days to sort of generate that kind of sort of hype around twists and stuff without risking it getting leaked in advance.
Just put directed by M. Night Shyamalan at the on the title.
Exactly, but then people go in thinking there's a twist, and then I mean, he still manages to do it every now and again because the twist in Split, managed to get me at the end when it was revealed that it was actually technically a sequel to Unbreakable. I was like, what? But then I think you were in the situation that you'd not really seen Unbreakable and therefore didn't realise it was such a big deal.
Yeah, like I'd sort of seen Unbreakable, and then I watched it, and I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Yeah, I wasn't as invested in that twist, but I was aware. Like, when I thought, oh, they've kind of nicely tied them together. That's okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, are there any sort of examples of sort of twists and stuff that you don't have to spoil for the audience, but ones in particular that you were like very impressed by and sort of changed the way you maybe saw the film, or were just utterly sort of blindsided by? One to think of, and it's one which is Old Boy, the original Old Boy back in 2003. That is, it's not like it's kind of like a twist, but it's one of the most messed up endings, when you realise what's happened, but then the fact that he then gets hypnotized to forget it, and it's just like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. And it's just like one of those ones that you're just like, whoa. It's like the ones which like leave you like sucker punched at the end, because let's face it, twist endings are normally not happy endings. They're normally quite dark and depressing and stuff like that. They don't end well for most of the people. So yeah, you don't see many twists in comedies, do you?
I suppose the one I would probably say is Atonement. I remember that ending, that twist really hit me like a ton of bricks. And for people that haven't seen it or are feeling inspired to go check it out, I went into that movie thinking it's going to be, it'll be an interesting enough period piece. But, it was a really impressive and dark movie. And that twist was something else at the end. It really hit me hard.
Oh yeah, I mean that fight. I know Saoirse Ronan was Oscar nominated for Atonement, but for me, I thought Vanessa Redgrave should have been nominated for that final scene alone. I thought she was utterly magnificent, and yeah, Atonement is an astounding film. I thought it was I think it's a masterpiece. Actually, I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's not my usual type of film. It's not the type of film that I would normally go out to see, but I was utterly floored by it. I thought it was sensational, and yes, a definite worthy of inclusion in sort of twist endings, because it's a very subtle one. It's not like a haha, look what we've managed to do here, we've managed to trick you. It's just played out beautifully, and yeah, astounding film.
Definitely.
So I guess that sort of brings us to the end of the sort of spoiler talk. We'll be talking about it. I guess we'll be potentially getting into some spoilers next week when we talk about Avengers Endgame, and we'll have Kim Morrison back with us to have a giant filibuster about it all. But as always, we do our 52 films by women pledge, and we always come up with a couple of suggestions. So, Lee, what have you picked for the listeners this week?
I have picked a movie I perhaps not such recommend, but I would say I am a fan of Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson. I think they've starred in some excellent movies sort of before and after Twilight across their careers. And for some reason this week, I decided to finally check out Twilight, directed by Catherine Hardwicke, who had directed 13, which was a film I was really fond of. And I think the whole Twilight series has recently been added to sort of Netflix, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a go. I'm always defending these people. If people are saying, hey, I'm not going to check out a film these guys were in because they've been associated with something like Twilight, I always say, hey, whatever happened in Twilight doesn't matter. They're brilliant actors, whether you look in something like Personal Shopper or Cosmopolitan High Life, they have been picking excellent films over the past few years. And I watched Twilight, and it was certainly interesting. It's kind of so bad it's kind of funny, really. And I think what kind of maybe I recommend it for is that, it's interesting to watch these two actors star in something which doesn't make good use of their perhaps acting talent, but it's really good to see someone like Catherine Hardwicke, being offered the opportunity to direct sort of a huge franchise. And while the rest of the film series would end up being directed by men, it's great to see a woman get the opportunity to launch a $1 billion franchise.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember the Twilight phenomenon. I was working at the Belmont at the time, and it was one that actually wasn't expected to do well. It wasn't expected to be this $1 billion franchise. They'd bought the rights to the book. People who knew the book knew that it could be a success, but certainly the movie industry wasn't paying a huge amount of attention until the opening weekend, and all the fans of the book turned up and watched it, and it then became as big as it was. But yeah, so there was never any real pressure. I guess maybe the sequels and whatever, maybe that's when they decided to go with maybe slightly more experience and whatever. But yeah, no, I remember seeing it and sort of, finding it, a bit sort of odd, and knowing now how good these actors are, if you watch it back, you're probably like, oh, right, okay. But yeah, I mean, even Anna Kendrick can't remember that she was in Twilight. So it's sparkly vampires and stuff like this, and love stories and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I would leave it there because the series gets like really stupid. Once it introduces Taylor Lautner with his always wanting to be topless, and I remember the scene. I was at a movie event, and it was for the sequel, and it was like Taylor Lautner's, he's got Kristen Stewart on the back of a motorbike, and she falls off, and he's like, oh my god, are you hurting? Oh, you're bleeding, and decides to rip off his shirt to become topless in order to wrap his like flannel shirt around her to stop bleeding, and everyone in the audience was like crying with laughter. But this was being presented as a serious romantic moment. It was like it's not going down the way they thought it was going to. So yeah, Twilight, wonderful.
I imagine your recommendation is going to be a bit more highbrow then.
Well, I might surprise you because, yeah, we earlier on, we were talking about a film which essentially featured a sort of like a spider catching a fly in her web, and I decided to go along the insect theme, and instead of spiders and flies, I've gone with bees, and a queen bee being Beyonce's Homecoming, which I watched on Netflix this weekend because it is directed by Beyonce Knowles Carter. So I decided to watch the music documentary film about her Coachella headlining gig from last year, where she became the first black woman to headline Coachella. And, as a concert, it certainly hits all the right notes. I mean, it's a fantastic show. She certainly puts on one hell of a show. In terms of a documentary, we're sort of getting behind the scenes of what it's like to put on the show. I didn't maybe think it was as successful, but I think this sort of goes into sort of grainy sort of black and white footage. A lot of it is done with sort of like voiceover of her sort of clearly maybe sort of recording sort of dialogue over the phone or something like that. And, she's the director, which I think it's an admirable choice because I can see why she wants to have control of the project. But I think sometimes music documentaries are better when there's a third party in control of the shots and stuff like that, and how they put it together. I think it's as a piece of music and sort of concert film, it's fantastic, but it's a sort of behind the scenes documentary of what it's like to put on a show. I think there are better ones out there. One being Katy Perry's Part of Me, I thought, which is actually a very good music documentary. And there's a couple of other ones out there, and I think they're on Netflix as well that you can catch. But I think it was a different choice for me this week, and it's certainly, there's clearly a huge fan base for this, and I personally look forward to seeing some Beyonce / Spider-Man Homecoming mashups in the upcoming weeks. Yeah, so, as we say, that brings us to the end of another filibuster, and we'll be back next week with Kim to discuss Avengers Endgame. In 3 words, Lee, how excited are you for Endgame?
Can't wait. Oh, can't wait! Exclamation point.
I am moist, very moist. Moist with anticipation. That's what I'm going to go with. Moist with anticipation.
I feel sorry for you.
I know. So on that rather disgusting note, we'll catch you next week. Cheers very much. Bye-bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.